The sky above the jagged mountains of Velos glowed with a sickly green hue, streaked with veins of orange lightning that crackled like angry whispers. The air was thick and heavy, carrying the metallic tang of toxins that made breathing difficult for any creature not native to this harsh world. Below, in the shadow of one of the tallest peaks, stood an imposing fortress made of black stone. Its walls were lined with weapons turrets, glowing faintly as they scanned the horizon for threats. This was the stronghold of the Drakthari army, feared across the galaxy for their relentless conquests. Inside the fortress, General Kale strode through the dimly lit corridors, his armored boots echoing against the cold floor. He was a towering figure, his broad shoulders draped in a dark cloak embroidered with golden insignias of rank. His face was sharp, angular, with piercing yellow eyes that seemed to burn into anyone who dared meet his gaze. To his subordinates, Kale was both revered and feared, a brilliant tactician whose victories had expanded the Drakthari Empire, but also a man whose temper could flare without warning. Today, however, Kale's mood was unusually calm. News had reached him earlier that morning about a strange discovery near the borderlands. A lone soldier had been captured during a routine patrol, wandering aimlessly through the toxic wasteland. At first, Kale dismissed it as unimportant. Likely, just another scavenger or deserter. But something about the report intrigued him. According to the scouts, the prisoner looked different, weak, pathetic even. And Kale couldn't resist the urge to see such a curiosity for himself. When he entered the main chamber where prisoners were held, Kale found the captive already secured to a metal chair bolted to the floor, chains wrapped tightly around there, arms and legs, ensuring there would be no escape. The prisoner wore armor that was far too large for their small frame, its surface battered and cracked from years of wear. A dented helmet covered most of their face, leaving only a sliver of pale skin visible beneath the rim. Their head hung low, shoulders slumped forward as if weighed down by exhaustion or despair. Kyle circled the prisoner slowly, studying them, with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "So," he said finally, his voice deep and commanding, "this is what passes for a soldier these days?" There was no response. The prisoner didn't move, didn't even flinch at the sound of his voice. Kale frowned, irritation flickering across his features. Reaching out, he grabbed the helmet and yanked it off, revealing the face beneath. What he saw surprised him, not because it was monstrous or alien, but because it was so ordinary. The prisoner was young, with short brown hair matted with dirt and sweat. Their face was thin, almost gaunt, with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes that stared blankly ahead. They didn't look dangerous. They barely looked alive. "Well," Kale barked, stepping back to cross his arms over his chest. "Do you have nothing to say? No grand speech about honor or defiance? Or are you simply too weak to speak?" Still, the prisoner remained silent. Kale sneered, shaking his head in disgust. "Pathetic," he muttered under his breath. Turning to one of the guards standing nearby, he gestured impatiently. "Bring me the scanner. Let's see what we're dealing with here." The guard hurried to comply, producing a handheld device that emitted a soft blue light as it scanned the prisoner. After a few moments, the results appeared on a small screen. The guard glanced at the data, then hesitated before speaking. "Sir, it appears this individual is human." "Human?" Kale echoed, raising an eyebrow in disbelief. Humans were a species he knew little about. They lived on a distant planet called Earth, which the Drakthari had largely ignored due to its lack of advanced technology. From what little intelligence they had gathered, humans were considered primitive, easily conquered if necessary. Yet here was one, alone and unarmed, wandering through the most hostile regions of Velos. It made no sense. "Are you certain?" Kyle demanded, turning back to the prisoner. He leaned closer, scrutinizing their face as if searching for some hidden truth. "You're telling me this thing is a human?" "Yes, sir," the guard replied nervously. "The readings confirm it." For a long moment, Kale said nothing. Then a slow smile spread across his face, cruel and mocking. "A human," he repeated, chuckling softly. "How amusing. Tell me, little one," he added, addressing the prisoner directly. What brings you all the way out here? Did you think you could spy on us? Or perhaps you were hoping to join our ranks?" He laughed again, louder this time, clearly enjoying the absurdity of the idea. Finally, the prisoner spoke, their voice hoarse and quiet, but steady nonetheless. "I'm not here to fight," they said simply. "I'm here to survive." Kyle froze, his amusement fading as quickly as it had come. There was something in the prisoner's tone, something defiant, despite their obvious vulnerability, that struck a nerve. Narrowing his eyes, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Survive? In this place? Don't make me laugh. You don't belong here. You're weak, useless, a waste of oxygen." The prisoner didn't respond, their gaze fixed firmly on the ground. But Kale wasn't finished. Pacing back and forth, he continued his tirade, his words growing sharper with each passing second. "You humans are all the same. So fragile. So insignificant. You cling to life like insects desperate to avoid being crushed. And yet..." He paused, tilting his head thoughtfully. "There must be a reason you've survived this long. Perhaps I underestimated you. Perhaps you're hiding something after all." With that, Kale turned abruptly and strode toward the door, calling over his shoulder as he went. "Take them to the holding cells. I'll decide what to do with them later." As the guards moved to obey, he added one final remark, his tone dripping with mockery. "And give them some water. Wouldn't want our precious little human to die before we can have some fun." As the door slammed shut behind him, the prisoner let out a shaky breath, their body trembling slightly from the effort of remaining still. They had survived, for now, but they knew this was only the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, they would need every ounce of strength and cunning they possessed to endure it. Unbeknownst to Kale, the prisoner's name was Hyan, and though they might have looked weak and broken, within them burned a quiet resolve, a determination to protect their people, no matter the cost. The next morning, General Kale stood in the center of a large arena carved into the rocky terrain outside the fortress. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of burning metal from nearby drills used to mine resources for the Drakthari war machine. Rows of soldiers filled the stands surrounding the arena, their armor gleaming under the dim light of Velos's twin suns. They were here not just to watch, but to learn, to see how their general dealt with weakness when it dared to cross his path. At the far end of the arena, Hyan was led out by two guards. Their hands were bound behind their back, and they walked with slow, deliberate steps, as if every movement required immense effort. Despite their frail appearance, there was something about the way they carried themselves, a quiet defiance that didn't match their battered state. The crowd jeered and laughed, pointing fingers and shouting insults. To the Drakthari, this human was nothing more than a spectacle, an oddity to be mocked before being disposed of. Kyle watched silently, from his position at the edge of the arena, arms crossed over his chest. His yellow eyes narrowed as he studied Hyan, searching for any sign of fear or hesitation. "Let's see what you're made of," he muttered under his breath, though his voice carried enough authority that those closest to him turned their heads briefly before returning their attention to the scene unfolding below. Hyan was brought to the center of the arena and forced to kneel. A moment later, a towering figure stepped forward to join them. This was Rhinoc, one of Kale's most trusted warriors and a veteran of countless battles. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, Rhinoc's muscular frame was encased in heavy battle armor, reinforced with energy shields. His face was scarred from years of combat, and his expression was one of pure disdain as he looked down at the human kneeling before him. "This is your opponent?" Rhinoc asked loudly, addressing Kale, but loud enough for everyone to hear. He let out a booming laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "General, I expected better. This isn't even worth my time." Kale smirked, clearly enjoying the theatrics. "Prove it," he replied coolly. "Show me, and everyone else, just how weak this creature truly is." Rhinoc nodded, stepping back a few paces as the guards released Hyan's bindings and shoved them roughly toward the middle of the arena. Without waiting for further instruction, Rhinoc charged forward, moving with surprising speed for someone of his size. His fist swung through the air, aiming straight for Hyan's head. But instead of standing still and taking the blow, Hyan dropped to the ground, rolling sideways just in time to avoid the strike. The crowd erupted into cheers and laughter, some clapping sarcastically, while others shouted encouragement to Rhinoc. Kyle leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. For a brief moment, he thought he saw something flash in Hyan's eyes, something sharp and calculating. It wasn't fear or panic, it was focus. Rhinoc didn't give Hyan much time to recover. He lunged again, swinging both fists like hammers aimed to crush. Each attack landed mere inches away as Hyan ducked, dodged, and sidestepped with surprising agility. Though smaller and weaker physically, Hyan moved with precision, using Rhinoc's momentum against him whenever possible. When Rhinoc tried to grab them, Hyan slipped between his massive arms and darted to the side, staying just out of reach. "What are you doing?" Rhinoc growled, frustration beginning to creep into his voice. "Stand still and fight like a real warrior." But Hyan ignored him, continuing to evade every blow. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to survive. Every movement was calculated, every step deliberate. They knew they couldn't overpower Rhinoc, so they relied on speed and strategy instead. When Rhinoc swung wide, leaving himself momentarily unbalanced, Hyan seized the opportunity. With a quick burst of motion, they swept their leg low, knocking Rhinoc's foot out from under him. The giant stumbled backward, caught off guard by the sudden move. The crowd fell silent for a split second before erupting into gasps and murmurs. Even Kale raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. No one had expected the human to last this long, or to land a hit on Rhinoc no less. But the fight was far from over. Regaining his footing, Rhinoc roared in anger, charging forward with renewed ferocity. This time he didn't hold back. His fists flew faster, his movements more aggressive. Hyan struggled to keep up, their body trembling from exhaustion. One punch grazed their shoulder, sending them sprawling to the ground. Another struck their side, eliciting a sharp cry of pain. Blood trickled from a cut above their eyebrow, mingling with sweat and dirt on their face. Still, Hyan refused to give up. As Rhinoc loomed over them, preparing for a final blow, Hyan kicked upward with all their remaining strength, striking Rhinoc squarely in the knee. The impact caused the larger warrior to stagger, giving Hyan just enough time to scramble to their feet. Using the last reserves of their energy, they delivered a swift kick to Rhinoc's midsection, causing him to double over in surprise. For a moment, it seemed like Hyan might actually have a chance. But Rhinoc recovered quickly, grabbing Hyan by the collar and lifting them off the ground with one hand. Hyan thrashed wildly, trying to break free, but it was no use. With a powerful swing, Rhinoc slammed them back onto the hard surface of the arena, knocking the wind out of them. Hyan lay motionless, too battered and drained to move. The crowd cheered wildly, celebrating Rhinoc's victory. Kale stepped forward, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene. Rhinoc stood triumphantly over Hyan, breathing heavily but grinning with satisfaction. "See, General," he said, gesturing to the unconscious human. "I told you this was a waste of time." Kale didn't respond immediately. He walked closer, crouching beside Hyan and studying their bruised and bloodied form. For a moment, he almost felt impressed. Not because Hyan had won, because they hadn't, but because they had fought with such tenacity despite overwhelming odds. Most beings would have given up within seconds, yet this human had pushed themselves to the very brink of collapse. "Take them to the infirmary," Kale ordered finally, rising to his full height. "Patch them up. I'm not done with them yet." As the guards dragged Hyan away, Kale turned to address the gathered soldiers. "Remember this," he said, his voice carrying across the arena. "Strength isn't always measured by size or power. Sometimes it's about endurance, determination, and sometimes—" He paused, glancing briefly at the retreating figure of the prisoner. "It's about knowing when to stand your ground." Though his words were meant to inspire his troops, Kale couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this human was more than they appeared. There was something unsettling about their resilience, something that hinted at deeper layers beneath their fragile exterior. Whatever it was, Kyle intended to find out. For now, however, the fight was over. And though Hyun had lost, they had earned a grudging respect, not just from Kyle, but from some of the soldiers who had witnessed their struggle. In the days to come, that respect would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. The infirmary was a cold, sterile room deep within the fortress. Its walls were lined with metal shelves stocked with medical supplies, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. Bright lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the tiled floor. Hyun lay unconscious on one of the narrow beds, their body wrapped in bandages to cover the cuts and bruises from the fight in the arena. Their breathing was shallow but steady, a sign that they were still alive despite the brutal beating they had endured. Lieutenant Yunha stood nearby, her arms crossed as she observed the prisoner. She was a tall woman with sharp features and piercing, gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, emphasizing the stern expression on her face. Yunha was known throughout the Drakthari ranks as an expert interrogator, a specialist in extracting information from even the most stubborn captives. To her, prisoners were not people. They were puzzles to be solved, secrets to be uncovered. Kyle had personally assigned her to question Hyun, believing that her methods would break the human quickly. "Find out everything they know," he had ordered. "Leave no stone unturned." Unha approached the bed slowly, studying Hyun's battered form with clinical detachment. Though she had seen countless prisoners in similar states, there was something about this one that intrigued her. Most beings broke down after enduring what Hyun had gone through, physically and mentally, but this human hadn't uttered a single plea for mercy during the fight. Even now, lying helpless and injured, they radiated a quiet strength that made Yunha curious. She waited patiently until Hyun began to stir, their eyelids fluttering open as consciousness returned. For a moment, they simply stared at the ceiling, their gaze unfocused as if trying to piece together where they were. Then, realizing they weren't alone, they turned their heads slightly to look at Yunya. There was no fear in their eyes, only a weary acceptance of their situation. "Good morning," Yuna said calmly, her voice smooth and measured. "Or should I say good afternoon? You've been out for quite some time." Hyun didn't respond, their expression unreadable. They shifted slightly on the bed, wincing as pain shot through their body. Yuna watched them closely, noting every movement, every flicker of emotion, or lack thereof. "I'm Lieutenant Yunha," she continued, pulling up a chair and sitting beside the bed. "You might have heard of me. I specialize in getting answers." Still, Hyun remained silent, their gaze fixed on the wall behind Yunha. She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. "Let's start simple, shall we? What is your name?" There was a long pause before Hyun finally spoke, their voice hoarse but steady. "Does it matter?" Yuna smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It does to me. And trust me, you'll find it much easier to cooperate than to resist." Hyun let out a soft laugh, almost imperceptible, but enough to catch Yunha off guard. "Cooperate?" they echoed, their tone laced with irony. "What makes you think I care what happens to me?" That response gave Yunha pause. Most prisoners either begged for leniency or tried to negotiate their way out of trouble. This human, however, seemed completely indifferent to their fate. It was unsettling and fascinating at the same time. "You're smarter than you look," Yuna admitted after a moment. "But cleverness won't save you here. Eventually everyone talks. The question is whether you want to make things easy on yourself or difficult." Hyun closed their eyes briefly, exhaling slowly. When they opened them again, their gaze was sharper, more focused. "Ask your questions," they said quietly, "but don't expect honest answers." Yunha raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the challenge. "Fair enough," she replied. "Tell me about Earth. How many ships do you have? What kind of weapons are you using to defend yourselves?" Hyun tilted their heads slightly, pretending to consider the question. "Earth has no ships," they answered finally. "We're peaceful. We don't believe in war." Yunha chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Peaceful? That's funny, because General Kale says otherwise. He believes Earth is hiding something. Something powerful enough to pose a threat to us. And yet here I am, Hyan countered, gesturing weakly to their injured body. Alone, unarmed. If Earth is so dangerous, why send someone like me? It was a valid point, one that made Yunha hesitate. Still, she wasn't ready to give up. Maybe you're just the beginning, she suggested, a scout sent to gather intelligence before the real attack begins. Hyan shrugged, wincing as the movement tugged at their wounds. Believe what you want, they said dismissively, but I'm telling the truth. Earth isn't your enemy. For the next hour, Yuna peppered Hyan with questions, probing for weaknesses in their story. Each time, Hyan responded with vague or misleading answers, carefully planting seeds of misinformation. They described Earth as a primitive world with outdated technology, incapable of mounting any significant defense against the Drakthari. They claimed their mission had been purely exploratory, emphasizing how isolated and vulnerable humans truly were. Despite herself, Yuna found herself starting to doubt Kale's assumptions. Was it possible that Earth really wasn't a threat? Or was this human simply too skilled at deception? When the interrogation ended, Yuna left the infirmary deep in thought. She reported her findings to Kale, presenting both the information Hyan had provided and her own suspicions. They could be lying, she concluded, but there's also a chance they're telling the truth. Either way, we need to proceed cautiously. Kale listened silently, his expression unreadable. When Yuna finished speaking, he nodded slowly. Keep questioning them, he ordered, and watch them closely. Something about this doesn't sit right with me. Back in the infirmary, Hyan allowed themselves a small smile once they were alone. They knew they hadn't convinced Yuna completely, but they had planted enough doubt to buy themselves some time. Time to recover. Time to plan. Time to survive. As the hours passed, Hyan drifted in and out of sleep, their mind racing with thoughts of escape. They couldn't stay here indefinitely, not with Kale growing increasingly suspicious, but escaping a heavily guarded fortress on an alien planet seemed impossible. Unless someone on the inside decided to help. Later that evening, a young medic named Jinwoo entered the infirmary. He was slighter in build compared to the other soldiers, with short black hair and kind brown eyes that contrasted sharply with the harsh environment around him. Unlike many of his peers, Jinwoo had never fully embraced the Drakthari ideology of conquest and domination. He hated seeing others suffer, especially when it was unnecessary. When he saw Hyan lying on the bed, his heart sank. The human looked worse than he'd expected, bruised, bloody, and utterly broken. Yet there was something about their demeanor that struck him. Despite their injuries, they carried themselves with a quiet dignity that reminded Jinwoo of stories his grandmother used to tell about heroes who stood firm in the face of adversity. Approaching the bed cautiously, Jinwoo cleared his throat. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. Hyan opened their eyes, surprised to hear kindness in someone's voice for the first time since arriving on Velos. "Alive," they replied dryly. "For now." Jinwoo offered a small smile. That's something at least. He checked their vitals, making sure their injuries were healing properly. As he worked, he glanced around to ensure no one else was watching. Satisfied that they were alone, he leaned in closer. "I can get you food," he whispered. "And water. Maybe even a blanket if you need it." Hyan studied him carefully, unsure whether to trust him. "Why would you help me?" they asked bluntly. Jinwoo hesitated, then shrugged. "Because what's happening to you isn't right. You don't deserve this." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hyan nodded slowly, accepting the offer. "Thank you," they murmured. Over the next few days, Jinwoo became a frequent visitor to the infirmary. Under the guise of routine checkups, he brought Hyan extra rations, clean bandages, and messages scrawled on scraps of paper. Through these exchanges, Hyan learned valuable details about the fortress, the location of key rooms, patrol schedules, and security protocols. More importantly, they discovered that not all Drakthari shared Kale's thirst for war. One night, as Jinwoo tended to Hyan's wounds, he voiced what had been weighing on his mind. "You're planning to escape, aren't you?" he asked quietly. "Hyan, froze, caught off guard by the directness of the question. After a moment, they nodded. Yes, they admitted. But I don't know how yet. Jinwoo sighed, glancing nervously toward the door. If you try, you'll need help. I can assist. You, but it will be risky. Hyon searched his face, looking for any sign of deceit. All they found was sincerity. Why would you risk your life for me? They asked. Because someone has to, Jinwoo replied simply. And because I believe in doing what's right. Even if it means going against orders. With Jinwoo's help, Hyon began formulating a plan. Slowly but surely, they pieced together a strategy to slip past the guards and reach the hangar where their damaged scout ship was being kept. It wouldn't be easy, but it was their only chance. As they prepared for the attempt, Hyon couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. They were still surrounded by enemies, trapped on an alien planet light years away from home. But for the first time since their capture, they weren't entirely alone. The fortress was eerily quiet in the early hours of the morning. Most of the soldiers were either asleep or stationed at their posts far from the infirmary, leaving the dimly lit corridors deserted. The faint hum of machinery echoed through the halls, blending with the occasional crackle of energy shields that lined the walls. It was during this lull in activity that Jinwoo made his way to Hyun's bedside, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Hyun stirred as Jinwoo approached, their eyes flickering open to meet his nervous but determined gaze. It's time, he whispered, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no one was watching. He placed the bundle on the edge of the bed and unfolded it carefully, revealing its contents: a set of plain gray coveralls, a forged ID badge, and a pair of worn boots. What's this? Hyun asked, their voice barely audible. Your disguise, Jinwoo replied, helping them sit up slowly. If you're going to get out of here, you'll need to blend in. These belong to a maintenance worker who won't be needing them anymore. Hyun frowned, understanding the implication behind Jinwoo's words. You didn't— No, I didn't kill anyone, Jinwoo interrupted quickly, shaking his head. He's just indisposed for now, knocked out cold. But we don't have much time before he wakes up or someone notices he's missing. Hyun nodded, pushing aside their discomfort. They knew survival often came at a cost, and right now, they couldn't afford to hesitate. With Jinwoo's help, they changed into the coveralls, wincing as the fabric brushed against their still healing wounds. Once dressed, they tucked the ID badge into a pocket and slipped on the boots, which were slightly too big but serviceable. You look convincing enough, Jinwoo said, stepping back to examine them. Just keep your head down and avoid eye contact. If anyone asks, you're part of the repair crew sent to fix the power grid in Sector B7. Hyun took a deep breath, trying to steady their nerves. And if they check my ID? They won't, Jinwoo assured them. Not unless you give them a reason to. Trust me, most of these soldiers are lazy when it comes to inspections. Just act like you know what you're doing. Before Hyun could respond, Jinwoo handed them a small device, a handheld scanner used by maintenance workers to monitor systems. Take this. It'll make you look more legitimate. Oh, and— He hesitated, pulling something else from his pocket. It was a folded piece of paper. Here's a map of the fortress. I marked the route to the hangar. Stick to it, and you should be able to avoid most of the patrols. Hyun accepted the map, their hands trembling slightly as they tucked it into their pocket. Thank you, they said quietly, meeting Jinwoo's gaze. I owe you everything. Jinwoo shook his head, a sad smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Don't thank me yet. You haven't made it out alive. With that, he led Hyun to the door and peeked outside, scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. Seeing none, he gestured for Hyun to follow him. Together, they moved quickly and quietly, sticking to the shadows as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the fortress. Every step felt like an eternity, each sound amplified in the silence. The soft scuff of boots against the floor, the rhythmic hum of distant machinery, even the sound of their own breathing. At one point, they froze as a group of soldiers rounded a corner ahead of them. Hyun pressed themselves flat against the wall, lowering their head and pretending to inspect the scanner in their hand. Jinwoo did the same, muttering something about recalibrating the system. The soldiers passed without giving them a second. glance. Their conversation focused on some upcoming battle simulation. When the coast was clear, Jinwoo motioned for Hyun to continue. They reached a stairwell leading down to the lower levels of the fortress, where the hangar was located. As they descended, the air grew colder, and the lighting became dimmer. Pipes crisscrossed overhead, dripping condensation onto the metal steps below. Hyun tightened their grip on the scanner, their heart pounding in their chest. Finally, they arrived at a heavy steel door marked with the label Sector B7. Jinwoo stopped, turning to face Hyun. "This is where we part ways," he said, softly. "From here, you're on your own." Hyun stared at him, reluctant to let go of the only ally they had in this alien world. "Won't they suspect you? If they find out you helped me?" "They might," Jinwoo admitted, shrugging. "But I'll deal with that if it happens. Right now, your priority is getting off this planet. Don't worry about me." Hyun wanted to argue, to insist that Jinwoo come with them, but they knew it was impossible. Instead, they nodded, forcing themselves to focus on the task ahead. "Good luck," they said finally, their voice thick with emotion. "You too," Jinwoo replied, offering a small salute before disappearing back up the stairs. Taking a deep breath, Hyun pushed open the door and stepped inside. The hangar was vast, filled with rows of ships and vehicles in various states of repair. Sparks flew from welding stations where technicians worked tirelessly, while others carried tools and parts between projects. The noise level was high, making it easier for Hyun to blend in as they moved cautiously toward the far end of the hangar. Using the map Jinwoo had given them, Hyun located their damaged scout ship tucked away in a secluded corner. It looked worse than they remembered, its hull scorched and dented, one of its engines clearly non-functional. Still, it was their only chance of escape. Approaching it cautiously, they scanned the area for guards or security cameras. Seeing none, they slipped inside and began working on the controls. Their hands trembled as they tried to activate the ship's systems, the pain in their body making it difficult to concentrate. After several tense minutes, the console lit up with a low hum, signaling that the ship was operational, at least partially. Hyun knew they wouldn't have much time once the engines powered up. The noise would attract attention. As they finished, their preparations, shouts erupted from the other side of the hangar. Soldiers rushed past, weapons drawn, searching for the source of the disturbance. Hyun glanced toward the commotion and saw Jinwoo standing near the entrance, holding off, a group of guards to buy them more time. His bravery brought tears to Hyun's eyes, but there was nothing they could do to help him now. Summoning every ounce of strength they had left, Hyun activated the ship's thrusters and guided it toward the hangar's massive doors. Alarms blared as the doors began to open, revealing the toxic skies of Velos beyond. Without hesitation, Hyun piloted the ship through the gap, feeling the violent turbulence of the planet's atmosphere shake the vessel violently. Behind them, the fortress grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the jagged horizon. Hyun slumped back in the pilot's seat, exhausted but alive. They had made it out, but at what cost? Unbeknownst to them, General Kale watched the scene unfold from the command center, his expression unreadable as the stolen ship vanished into space. For a moment, he said nothing, his mind racing with thoughts of the human who had slipped through his grasp. Then, turning to his subordinates, he issued a single order. "Prepare the fleet. We're invading Earth." Far above Velos, Hyun's ship limped through the void, its damaged systems struggling to maintain stability. Though battered and bruised, Hyun allowed themselves a moment of relief. They had survived, for now. But they knew the fight was far from over. The stars outside Hyun's ship twinkled like distant lanterns, casting faint light through the cracked viewport. The vessel groaned and shuddered as it limped through space, its damaged systems barely holding together. Sparks occasionally flew from the control panel, forcing Hyun to swat them away with trembling hands. Every movement sent sharp jolts of pain through their body, but they couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. Earth was still light years away, and every second counted. Despite the chaos around them, Hyun's mind raced with clarity. They replayed the events of the past few days over and over again, piecing together what had happened and what it meant for humanity. Kale's reaction during their escape hadn't gone unnoticed. The general's cold stare and clenched fists spoke volumes. He wasn't just angry. He was intrigued. And that curiosity could spell disaster for Earth. Hyan leaned forward, wincing, as their bruised ribs protested the motion. Using the flickering screen on the dashboard, they accessed the data they had gathered while undercover in the fortress. It wasn't much. Scraps of information stolen from Jinwoo's notes and snippets of conversations overheard between soldiers, but it painted a terrifying picture. The Drakthari were planning an invasion, not just of Earth but of multiple planets, across the galaxy. Their technology was far superior, their armies vast and well-trained. Humanity stood no chance unless they prepared immediately. As Hyan sifted through the files, one particular piece of information caught their attention. A simulation program used by the Drakthari to train their troops. According to the documents, the program recreated environments based on real-world data collected from reconnaissance missions. In other words, if the Drakthari had simulated Earth's terrain, they already knew its weaknesses, its cities, its defenses, its vulnerabilities. A chill ran down Hyan's spine as they realized the implications. The Drakthari weren't merely planning an attack, they were preparing for total domination. If Earth didn't act quickly, millions would die. But there was another detail that gave Hyan pause, a name mentioned repeatedly in the files. Project Velos. At first glance, it seemed unrelated to the invasion plans, but something about it nagged at Hyan. Why would Kale dedicate so many resources to a single project? What made Velos so important? Before they could delve deeper, the ship's warning alarms blared, snapping Hyan out of their thoughts. A red light flashed on the console, accompanied by a series of rapid beeps. Hyan's heart sank as they scanned the readings. One of the engines was failing, and without immediate repairs, the ship wouldn't make it much farther. Not now, Hyan muttered under their breath, gripping the edges of the seat to steady themselves. Pain shot through their arms, but they ignored it, focusing instead on the task at hand. Pulling up a diagnostic menu, they tried to isolate the problem. The engine core was overheating, likely due to damage sustained during their hasty escape from Velos. Without proper tools or replacement parts, fixing it would be nearly impossible. Desperation clawed at Hyan's chest as they searched the cramped interior of the ship for anything that might help. Tools were scattered across the floor, remnants of earlier repair attempts. Grabbing a wrench, they opened the maintenance hatch beneath the cockpit and crawled inside. The tight space reeked of burned metal and coolant fluid, making it hard to breathe. But Hyan pressed on, using the dim glow of their wrist-mounted flashlight to guide their movements. For hours, they worked tirelessly, tightening bolts, rerouting power lines, and patching leaks with whatever scraps they could find. Sweat dripped into their eyes, stinging the cuts on their face, but they refused to stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the engine stabilized. The hum of the ship grew steadier, and the warning lights faded. Hyan collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Their body ached all over, and their vision blurred from exhaustion. But they allowed themselves a small smile. They had done it, for now. The ship was still operational, though barely. It would have to do. As they climbed back into the pilot's seat, Hyan noticed something strange on the navigation display. A cluster of blinking dots appeared on the screen, moving steadily toward their position. At first, they thought it might be debris or stray asteroids, but then the system labeled the objects as unknown vessels. Fear gripped Hyan's heart. Could the Drakthari have sent ships after them? Were they being tracked? Hyan adjusted, the sensors trying to get a clearer reading. To their relief, the vessels didn't match any known Drakthari designs. Instead, they resembled smaller, faster crafts, possibly scouts or private traders. Still, caution was key. Hyan changed course slightly, angling the ship away from the approaching vessels. They activated the cloaking device, hoping it would mask their presence long enough to slip past unnoticed. The device sputtered ominously, its energy reserves dangerously low, but it held steady. For now. Minutes passed like hours as Hyan monitored the situation. The unknown ships drew closer, their trajectories intersecting with Hyan's path. Just when it seemed inevitable that they would be spotted, the vessels veered off suddenly, disappearing into the void. Hyan exhaled sharply, slumping back in their seat. Whatever those ships were, they weren't interested in pursuing a damaged scout vessel. With the immediate threat gone, Hyan turned their attention back to the data they had uncovered. Project Velos continued to gnaw at their mind, urging them to dig deeper. Scrolling through the files again, they found references to experimental weapons testing and environmental modifications. One phrase stood out: enhanced atmospheric adaptation. Suddenly, it clicked. Velos wasn't just a military outpost, it was a proving ground. The toxic skies, the jagged mountains, the harsh conditions, they weren't natural. The Drakthari had engineered them to test their technology and train their soldiers for hostile environments. And if they could alter a planet's atmosphere to suit their needs, they could do the same to Earth. Realization hit Hyan like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about conquest, it was about transformation. The Drakthari intended to remake Earth in their image, turning it into another Velos, a barren wasteland where only the strongest survived. The weight of this revelation bore down on Hyan, threatening to crush them. They had always known the CI. Stakes were high, but this was beyond anything they had imagined. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, it was fighting for its soul. Summoning the last of their strength, Hyan plotted a direct course for Earth. There was no time to waste. Every moment spent adrift in space brought the Drakthari closer to their goal. As the ship surged forward, Hyan clenched their fists tightly, resolve burning within them. They had faced overwhelming odds before and lived to tell the tale. They would do it again. Far behind them, the fortress on Velos stood silent under the green-tinged sky. General Kale paced the command center, his yellow eyes blazing with fury. His subordinates flinched as he barked orders, organizing fleets and strategizing tactics. The humans' escape had been humiliating, but it served as a valuable lesson. Humans were resourceful, adaptable, and dangerous. Underestimating them again would be a fatal mistake. Kale stopped abruptly, staring at the star map displayed on the wall. Somewhere out there, the human was heading home, carrying knowledge that could tip the scales in humanity's favor, but it didn't matter. By the time they reached Earth, it would be too late. The invasion would already be underway. Smiling grimly, Kyle turned to his officers. "Prepare the final assault," he ordered. "We leave for Earth at dawn." Back, aboard the scout ship, Hyan closed their eyes briefly, allowing themselves a moment of quiet reflection. They thought of Jinwoo, whose bravery had given them a fighting chance. They thought of the soldiers who had mocked them, the medic who had healed them, and the general who had underestimated them. Most of all, they thought of Earth, the blue-green jewel floating somewhere in the distance, teeming with life and hope. No matter what happened next, Hyan vowed to protect it.